We're good. Awesome. Well, hello everyone. It is a true pleasure to have a conversation with one of my Georgia Tech colleagues. This is in the category of since I arrived, I don't think a day or a week goes by without being very surprised about what's happening at Georgia Tech. And soon as after I arrived, I heard that we had an award-winning poet called Ilya Kaminsky. And I was so intrigued that I read one of his books, Deaf Republic. I have to admit, I read a lot, but I don't read poetry that often. And this book moved me and touched me in ways that I am not that often, if you will, touched by what I read. And so I needed to meet the man, the author. And as I started learning about his life, I became even more intrigued by your life journey and how kid from a Russian city in Ukraine ends up in the US, becomes a poet in a language that is not his own. And on the way, by the way, he studies law, which at some point in time I want you to tell us about it. And eventually lands at an Institute of Technology to teach poetry. And when you connect that story, I was like, I really need to meet this man. And we finally did. And I am absolutely delighted to share some of the Ilya story. Also, maybe talk a little bit about why poetry, especially why poetry for the people who, like me, normally don't necessarily reach out and read poetry. And then hopefully we'll get to talk about some of your very work. Is unbelievable. But and you can, by the way, read online about the many awards that Ilya has received as a poet, which are just simply impressive. And what a luxury to have a creative mind like this right here at Georgia Tech. So I want to maybe get back to your own life story, if that's okay, Ilya, and walk us through the moment when, if you can pinpoint when you discover literature, when you and why you decide to empty your mind and your heart into poetry. How does that happen?
First of all, thank you. Pleasure, truly. And also, to me, it is not at all unusual that a poet would be at Georgia Tech simply because language is our earliest form of technology. They used to call poets technicians of the sacred. What does that mean? How do you play the two things together? I hope today we will step a little bit away from the formal presentation and be just two humans thinking about words, about stories, about songs. Because I think that's what matters most to all of us. As for me, I lost my hearing, much of my hearing when I was 4. And in USSR, we didn't have, or I didn't wear the kind of technology I have now. Meaning, I grew up reading lips. And what does it mean for a child to grow up and watch sentences? So you say a sentence, I see it, but I also see the rest of the street. There is a cat brushing your leg. There's somebody behind you opening a newspaper, reading a political argument, not liking it, throwing it away, and deciding to pick it up and read it again. Then on the other side of the street, there are two people kissing. So there is a whole world of images that I later on, when I came to America, began to write in English. I realized that my first book, Dancing in Odessa, was mostly written in the language of image. That was the poetic device I was most drawn to. And poets kind of write in a language of devices. Some write in music, others write in images, others find different ways to bring emotion. And I hope that will be also something we can talk about. How do we use the language to inspire another?
So, but if you don't mind, back to your own story. So, remind me, how old were you when you landed in?
I came to the U.S. pretty soon after USSR fell apart. I was 16.
You were 16. So I know enough about language acquisition that if you study language after 16, you're far from being a native speaker of that language. So you must have been more comfortable in your native Russian. Why that choice?
That's a very personal question. To give you an honest answer, I didn't have any poetic ambition. My father passed away pretty soon after we came in 1993, and he passed away in 1994. And taught me poetry. So how could I possibly write something pretty for a man who taught me how to write to begin with? That felt kind of wrong. I felt like my family might feel a bit, oh, she's writing his pretty poem, you know. But if you're a poet, you have to write. And so I began writing in English, which I didn't really know. I was here only for a year. It was kind of a private language. But I realized more and more as the decades pass that we all have private language. And poetry is a kind of private language that is beautiful enough, skillful enough, well binding enough that we can share with other humans. They can understand.
Now, you went to college and then to law school, right?
Right.
So,
forgive me.
So why in the world a poet like you ends up in law school?
Well, number one, why not? If you can, why not? Number two, I did public interest law. I worked at Bay Area Legal Aid. I worked at the National Immigration Law Center in Oakland.
To this day?
No, right after law school.
Yeah.
Then at that time, Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor of California, also known as a bodybuilder. And it wasn't as easy to continue public interest profession. So I published a book of poems and began to look into that.
So we have, I asked Ilya to choose a few poems to share with us. And for no particular reason, these are pieces that Ilya chose. And by the way, we never decided who was going to read them.
Oh, well, we can go turn and turn. You can read one, I can read one.
Okay.
Well, however you're comfortable.
No, I'm happy. I'm happy to read. I'm a little bit self-conscious reading poetry with you, but I'm happy to give it a shot. If you give me feedback and you tell me, what I did wrong.
Perfect.
Okay. Wish me luck. This poem is The Three Oddest Words by Wisława Szymborska, Polish poet. When I pronounce the word future, the first syllable already belongs to the past. When I pronounce the word silence, I destroy it. When I pronounce the word nothing, I make something no non-being can hold.
Thank you. It was beautiful. Beautiful.
That was okay?
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Oh, you're so kind. So tell me about that poem. Why was that? Why did you choose it?
I find Szymborska's work in general to be fascinating because she's a poet who brings such complex ideas. Each one of these three little couplets has a very, very complex idea. And she is able to make it accessible to large numbers of people without making it sound overly simple. She is able to retain the mystery. To ask who are we in time? How do we articulate time to ourselves? When I pronounce the word future, the syllable already belongs to the past. There is a kind of skepticism that is not negative. It is searching, it's almost affirmative. When I pronounce the word silence, I destroy it. Who am I in language? What is language to me? What am I to it? It's a metaphysical question. And finally, probably the most complex, but also the most delightful moment in the poem, the last couplet. When I pronounce the word nothing, I make something that no non-being can hold. Fun to say, but it is also a very complex idea. I can spend the rest of the week just thinking. And for me, the art of poetry is the art of teaching productive solitude. We are kind of lonely country. Coming from US, the first thing that was striking to me is that so many folks they knew you don't know the neighbor's name. You know, poetry takes that loneliness and makes it into solitude. Allows us to be alone, but not alone. And that for me is a fascinating thing. But poetry can do many other things too. If you step out of this poem, you can teach us the senses. A great poet of the Spanish language, Lorca, said poet is a professor of five senses. He didn't say poet is a professor of creative writing at Georgia Tech. He said five senses. What would that mean? Here is a little haiku from a great Japanese poet, Basho. The temple bell stops, but the sound keeps coming out of the flowers. For me, as a deaf kid, learning the rhyme, learning the sounds of language, that was fascinating how I can see the sound.
The temple bell stops, but the sound keeps coming out of the flowers.
It's all kind of senses.
Wow, professor of the five senses.
Yeah.
So let's talk about language a little bit. So you grow up and are educated in Russian, then you land in this new language, becomes your private language, it becomes your vehicle for poetry. But you've kept reading poetry from all over the world. In fact, I follow you on Twitter. If you don't, do, because it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. It's actually refreshing. It's the source of poems, and I can see you bring poetry from all over the world. Now, you don't know all those languages, so sometimes that poetry reaches you in English, I suppose, most of the time. Does poetry translate?
Well, that is an ages-old question. A great American poet, Robert Frost, said poetry is lost. Great poet of Mexico, Sylvia Plath, said poetry is found.
Poetry is found in translation.
What survives greatest poem. To me, and I started talking about images. Images an international language. Image is also a language that survives the test. I can think of a poem, very simple image, Horace, a Latin poet. A young boy plays on a flute to cows. It can be translated into any language, no matter where you are in the world. You got it. It's an image.
Would you recommend, like, let's say, a Georgia Tech student who has never had to learn another language, or would you recommend that
Oh,
experience?
absolutely. It also, in addition to teaching us the richness of what is possible in the world, our richness of knowledge, of senses, it also shows us our limitations, shows us how to grow. But also, it's very interesting to read translation over time. Say, almost every year in English, we have a new translation of Homer or Dante.
Right.
Since 17th century, there are so many different Dantes and Homers and many others who have been translated over and over. That teaches us about the history of our own language, our own culture.
That's very interesting. I suppose it's like if you listen to a Brahms symphony from different conductors, right?
Exactly right.
Different sort of interpretations. That's fascinating. So you chose a second poem that actually deals with language. Who's going to read it this time?
If you like, I'll follow the order.
No.
You are the president.
I'll give it another. I'm getting to like this, by the way. But you need to give me feedback
Okay.
if you think I'm not doing this right. Discourse on the logic of language. English is my mother tongue. The mother tongue is not a foreign language, anguish, a foreign anguish. That's hard to read, especially the L anguish. How would you? Language.
She's trying to say language,
yeah.
but she tells you what she really means.
Where the poem starts moving from language morphing into anguish. Why did you choose this?
This is a contemporary poet, she is clearly writing about colonial. What happened? Rioting. How? Back. One full of pain. But look at how she begins it. English is my mother tongue is the first sentence. Very direct. Almost like a newspaper headline. English is my mother tongue. Anybody gets it. But then it gets complicated immediately. A mother tongue is not line break. Repetition of nothing. Not a foreign or one is strong. Which is kind of feel it. Not just as language and immediately realizes it's anguish.
Anguish.
Yeah. It's a lot of emotion.
Yes. And does it speak to you as I guess for both of us, English is our adopted language.
Absolutely, but it also speaks about history. It also speaks about torn bodies, torn stories becoming here on the page, words that are broken apart right in front of us. We, as the readers, are told to say them. The poem that really make every single word, every single line break, every sound doesn't need to be told in a very specific way. But what is beautiful about it, by the time we reach the end of this fragment, is that it breaks into song. You having said that, having gotten through it, you realize that it was music. It takes pain and makes it into music. And that is one of the greatest accomplishments of the art form, is that we can take this unspeakable emotion, disastrous, and make something that is only a few lines long that another human can.
So Let's talk about Georgia Tech for a second. I can imagine. I imagine this conversation in your life. You go to a party and you say, "Yes, I'm a poet." Oh, really? And what do you do? Is like, well, I teach at Georgia Tech, and they probably look at you as like, oh, he probably mispronounced that. He's Ukrainian. Georgia Tech poetry. Come on, no, that must be wrong. And you say, no, absolutely, I teach poetry at Georgia Tech. Explain why.
Number one, I teach in LMC. LMC, Heart of the Arts, Georgia Tech. We have fine arts, we have digital arts, we have art gallery, we have film, we have poetry on tech, we have science fiction. There is a lot of conversation about art happening in LMC. The beautiful thing about teaching poetry to students who study technology is that they pay incredible attention to craft. And poetry cannot be art without being great craft. Poetry is compassion, passion, emotion, plus craft. And so it's actually almost easier to teach poetry to Georgia Tech students because they get that right. They understand the importance in technician of language. But the other thing is, I think our students really want to find a way to express their emotions. It's very important for a human in this society in 2021, in the middle of a plague, to express our emotions, to share how we feel, to tell each other stories, to find the way toward the sound. So I find it's a very right place to be for me.
No, in fact, the other day I watched poetry. I watched Poetry at Tech, and I was in a way envious or jealous that had I mastered an art, and I've practiced many, but never enough to master any art, that I was missing a vehicle to convey emotion at a time of our lives where stress was so high and we were dealing with so much. So I find it really interesting. Art as I don't know that I would call it art as therapy, but in a way, art can be therapy, right?
Whether we are alive on this planet.
How about for, let's say, an engineering student who dreams to be an entrepreneur or an innovator? Can the arts help that? And do you think that practicing an art form can help a technology person, a computer scientist, an engineer to become more creative?
Oh, absolutely. What do you mean? That is what it. But in addition, don't just dedicate it. How can you write something that would? Poetry is also, of course, the art of memorable. How can this way that would move others?
I think they're going to replace your microphone. Or do you want to try to help him replace it? Or?
Brother, I can just hold it.
Okay. How about, can you hear me okay?
We were talking about lost in translation, right?
Lost in translation.
Thank you.
All right. So, by the way, you mentioned Thomas Lux, who was the founding director of poetry at Tech, and you mentioned some of his let's talk about being a pioneer, being a poet at Georgia Tech. Anything from his way of looking at the world that is worth repeating or thinking about?
Oh, absolutely. About 20 years ago, former president of Georgia Tech, Henry Bourne, and one of our alumnus have created a program the whole purpose of which is to bring students to enjoy the art of language. And Thomas Lux was our very first poet here, who believed that poetry is a machine made out of words. And if I have your permission to read one of his poems?
That would be terrific.
Bruce McIver was our alumni who brought Thomas Lux here. And that was a great gift to us. Here is a poem by Thomas Lux. It's called The Little Tooth. Your baby grows seduced, then 2, and 4, and 5. Then she wants some meat directly from the bone. So you will learn some words. You will fall in love with cretins, stoats, a sweet culture, way to jail. And you, your wife, get old, fly alone in a loon. Hudson, you did. You love it. Your feet are sore. It is dusk. Your daughter is tall. There's the whole life of a person in 9 lives. And it is circular. It begins with Persian, ends with Asian. And the Ranshim itself is underlined. And also notice how the line breaks work, how the silences. There's so much in this poem that's unsaid, but the reader picked up. For example, it is all line break. Over. That kind of surprise. Or, and you, your wife. It's kind of a poem of heartbreak, but also a delight in how it is said. You delight in the language, so your heart is not broken. The music lets you swim through delight through the pain of Asian.
You were very kind to let me read the earlier poems, because now I realize how it is done, and it's not what I demonstrated earlier. But I'll keep practicing. So before we talk about your work and the work that brought me to you, any advice to any of us who has never dared write a poem? And we say, I want to try. And you contemplate your notebook. How do you push us to jump?
Rule number 1 is start now, start tonight, start right away. Don't wait. Don't wait. Rule number 2 is get pen to paper, get your pencils moving. But also, ask yourself, what is my relationship to this language? It's not just for information. It is for the joy of it. You're here to enjoy the music. You're here to enjoy the image. You are here to be in conversation with every single poet that came before you. And that's a great thing because you're never alone. Gilgamesh, the first epic that we have on record, is 4,000 years old. We have 4,000 years of friendship between poets that want to be your friend. So start with sounds of words. Start with images that you see. Start with your emotion. Maybe you have to write your heart out. Just keep those pages full of how you feel. But then go back and imagine you're a sculptor. And you're Michelangelo. And there is somebody in the middle of your first draft is the great statue of David. And all you have to do is just to keep cutting toes. But poetry is a very joyful activity. It allows you to enjoy some of the biggest tragedies that you have. You got through them. Yes, of course you fall in love and sometimes your heart gets broken. Yes, of course you have grandparents or parents and they may get sick or worse. But you can repeat a poem by heart in the middle of the night. And it might help you get through this night. To be quite honest with you, why am I sitting here talking about poetry? I might wake up in the middle of the night and ask myself this very question. And I'm not going to pretend to always know the answer. But I recite a poem, says The Lines of Poetry by Elizabeth Bishop. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost, that their loss is no disaster. And so forth and so on. It's a great poem of Villanelle by Bishop. And it teaches me how to go on through my days. And it teaches me, yes, by information, but also by music, by the joy of saying things aloud. Poetry can teach great many things. For example, another couplet from W.H. Auden would make our whole society so much better when he says, if the equal affection cannot be, let the moral loving one be. Just imagine if all of our politicians said those lines to themselves before they woke up or before they went to bed. How much better would our world be?
Wow. So Ilya, when we face that empty page tonight, do we type it or do we type or do we handwrite? What's your craft?
Well, I would probably handwrite, but I do find myself typing sometimes because I make typos that teach me something. I do believe in surprise in language. I do think that sometimes intent is useful because it's your passion, but other times intent can be restrictive because you are within the prison of what you already know. And you want to get outside of that box, outside of conventional. And it's actually also true in technology. You don't want to be in a prison of what you already know. You want to get outside of the box. You want to play. You want to try new things. So sometimes I would type and see if I made a typo and what can that typo teach me something new.
So if facing that empty page is scary in itself, there's something scarier, which is when you fill that page and you decide to give it to someone else to read it. When at what point in your creation do you actually let someone else read your work?
Well, to begin with, to come back a little bit more to your earlier question, sometimes it is great to just write down your favorite words on it, and then see that maybe a metaphor can be born when you combine two completely unrelated words together, and where can that metaphor take you? I usually put my poems away for a little bit, then I read them again. Sometimes I read them backwards, or I read them one line at a time or one word at a time. Thomas Lax was famous for having many different pencils. He would underline different parts of speech, different colors, and ask himself, well, say, if my nouns are all green, do I have enough vivid, beautiful green on this page? So that's one way of editing. But when you feel like, okay, I have done my best, this is the best I can do, then you share with another and you get feedback.
So speaking of sharing your work, do you mind telling us a little bit about how this came about? I mean, there seems to be somewhat autobiographical, even though it's not, but there is something of you and your childhood in it, even though it really, I felt like it touched me, and I've never lived in Ukraine, but the story was very, very touching. Share with us how this work came to be. Where did it come from?
Thank you, and it's very kind of you to read this book. Thank you. This is a story of a pregnant woman and her husband in the middle of political unrest. At a public gathering, they see a soldier shoot and kill a young deaf boy. And in response to that murder, the whole community decides to protest by refusing to hear the authorities. This does have to do with my personal family story. In 1930s, my grandfather was called the enemy of the people, shot, and my grandmother was sent to Siberia for a decade. My father was a stolen child. There is a stolen child in that book, and that is very much based on a family story. But of course, growing up in USSR in a time of collapse, there is a war right now as we speak between Russia and Ukraine, and I come from a Russian-speaking city in Ukraine. That, of course, all was an influence on me when I was writing the book. But at the same time, I was already living in the United States, and I just moved to San Diego, California. Now, what do you do when you move to a new city? You go to Home Depot to get the hammer and the nails to put your bookshelves up. When you come to Home Depot in San Diego, which is a border town that calls itself America's happiest city, America's finest city, you see folks who are trying to get a job to move your furniture. And you also see those folks being dragged away the ice cars. And that is a common thing to see in San Diego. We see it on TV now, but it was not on TV when I first moved there 12 years ago. That was also very much part of this book. The strident link of thinking, I came here from Ukraine, it's a different world, and then seeing images of the world that have been very similar.
And how about this, the deaf part of the title, right? And this, how you use, like, people choose to be deaf. It's almost like an act of protest, or it's an act of disconnecting from the oppressor. I mean, how did you, I found that so intriguing and interesting.
Well, in this society, fortunately, we think of deafness as negative. It shouldn't be. Why should it be? Deaf people have wonderful cultures. They created their own language, American Sign Language, which is very different, say, from Russian Sign Language or British Sign Language and so forth. There is a wonderful, very curious experiment that was done a few decades ago by scientists when they put 4 hearing people in a room. They did not speak each other's language. And they left them alone for a number of hours, let's say 6 hours. They come back. People in the room were sitting in little corners looking at each other with suspicion.
No communication.
Yeah, no communication. Then they put 4 deaf people in a room, left them alone, and they were from different countries. They did not speak each other's sign language. They come back after a specific period of time. What happened? People were creating new sign language.
Wow.
That tells us about the limitations of our speech. As a poet, I just spent an hour talking to you about the joy of language, but I also need to be aware of limitations.
Wow. If you haven't read it, do yourself a favor and read Deaf Republic. It's just an absolutely phenomenal piece. And again, even though it's inspired by the history of your family, it is so contemporary in so many different ways. What are you working on now?
I'm trying to finish a book of essays that's both personal essays and essays about other writers, and writing new poems. What are you working on?
I am trying to find the courage to start writing.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
We have a lot of poetry classes at Georgia Tech.
I know. I'm very tempted. Any message that you want to leave us with?
The message is we are here for you. The message is don't be afraid to enter the world of arts. The world of arts is here to make your life delight. You're all working so incredibly hard. This is the world's top school. If you got here, God bless you, you're really smart. But it doesn't mean that you have to only think of being smart and then use the book isolation. There are different ways to approach the book. There are different ways to approach sharing of the book with others. We are here for you to make a community of music, community of arts, community of cinema. Those are all sister arts. My book is a hybrid book. It's a play, it's a poetry book, it's a story, it's lyrics, and so forth. So I very much believe in conversation. So Poetry Attack is wide open for you. Come and say hello. We bring some of the world's best writers to Georgia Tech. We bring Pulitzer Prize winners, National Book Award winners, MacArthur Genius Fellowship winners every year. They're here for you. We offer classes, but we also offer community workshops that are free. All you have to do is sign up. Come and be a part of our community.
Fantastic. Well, would you please join me in thanking our great colleague, Ilya Kaminsky.
Thank you.
And continue the conversation if you have a few more minutes. Thank you.